So week two of Endgame might feel like a little bit of a redundant process, right? Maybe you've gotten through most of this and got sort of really sort of examined it all, in week one. In which case, great. That gives you more time to sort of look at your final projects. But something that's going to be really important, right, is sort of analyzing how we evaluate the ending of this play, right? Again, we are new to the theater of the absurd, most of us, and what that means is that plays do not necessarily have, a beginning, middle, end as traditional plays might, right? We often will think of plays in the theater of the absurd as more circular, that there is sort of an ongoing infinity cycle of despair. And in a way, it sort of reflects what we've learned a little bit about the absurd and about the existential thoughts of Sartre and even to a certain extent, Kierkegaard, that, we are kind of stuck in this cycle of over-analyzing despair for existential purposes, right? We always do. We're always making actions that give us right fear for what we have done, and that fear sort of propels us into more action, right? All the while, we must be responsible for all of it, right? And that seems like cyclical, and can lead to a lot of despair. Not to mention, right, when we think about something like the daily grind, quote unquote, right? What every day looks like for the rest of our lives, considering it from any one point in your life becomes overwhelming, right? And considering the theater of the absurd as a day in the life of, right, Didi and Gogo or Ham and Clove and the parents, and is there a way to determine whether time is proceeding, whether it's moving forward, right? um it's hard to do, right? And when we think about the absurd, this question of um death, ending it all, just simply wasting away, um in many plays of the absurd, there is the looming threat, right, that characters make of, oh, I'm going to end it all, right? I'm going to die. Very rarely do we see that come to fruition, right, in a play. However, right, we do see that threat, that despair sort of borne out, in part because of the reaction of a character to a cyclical life of misery, right? Basically experiencing the same things that Camus experiences in the myth of Sisyphus, not Camus, that Sisyphus experiences in the myth of Sisyphus, right? Rolling that ball up the hill to see it roll back down, rolling that ball up the hill to see it roll back down. And characters sort of dealing with that sort of cyclical nature of everything, right? So when we look at right theater of the absurd, in many cases, like I said, right, there is this idea of the cyclical nature of life. It's very sort of disturbing to see. In certain cases, it can bring on a lot of what the French would refer to as ennui, right? Not necessarily boredom, but sort of despair, to the point of, what's the point, right? I can't do anything about it, so I will just sort of waste away. I think we see a lot of characters sort of in that place, right? Um, and I think it's also important to consider in both of the plays we've kind of looked at up to this point, Waiting for Godot and Endgame, and even, right, even though it's not considered necessarily to be a play of the absurd, No Exit, that there is what feels like an eternity happening, right? And there is no way to mark that time has proceeded and gone forward. In Waiting for Godot, right? What do we see? We see the same sort of thing happening in both scenes, but of course, right, the nature of Lucky and Pazzo changes, where Pazzo has become blind, right? Lucky has not changed at all. We don't really see, right? and we get this idea that, oh, one day these things happen. So are we actually seeing 2 days in succession, or are we seeing, right, a lifetime worth of sort of things repeating and repeating and repeating? And do we know that tomorrow Pazzo will still be blind? Will he still not be able to, you know, will things be the same, right? We're not sure. We're not sure because we don't know. There is no way to mark time. Endgame presents us with similar notions. I will talk about those in the next video.